Today in Ice Beta, we're chatting with Melissa Orzechowski of the Adirondack Queer Ice Fest, a no-cost ice climbing festival solely dedicated to the LGBTQ plus outdoor community. When the idea first came about, the organizers, Melissa, Robbi, and Noel, thought they might be the only attendees, just the three of them. They didn't know how big the community was in the Adirondacks or beyond. When 40 people showed up in the middle of a blizzard, many of whom hadn't even ice climbed before, they knew there was a need. Now, in their third year, they keep being surprised. Registration filled up within 45 minutes. In this episode, we talk about why identity based affinity spaces are important, the power of starting, however small, and being the change you want to see. Before we get to our conversation, a quick word from our lead sponsor. Blue ice is the best kind of ice, and also my choice when it comes to fast and light ice climbing gear. The aerolites go in like hot knife through butter, and their climbing packs hit the sweet spot between function and lightweight. Designed to get to the point in the Alpine, their gear is tested by mountain professionals between the Alps and the Wasatch. If you're looking to get to the point too, and with a little less weight in your kit, check out Blue Ice's gear at blueice.com or your favorite local retailer. So, you grew up in Michigan. Had you heard of ice climbing before moving to Marquette?
No, I had no idea. As a child, would get to go to the climbing gym once a year, and I thought it was the most incredible thing and desperately wanted to get into gym climbing. Even outdoor climbing wasn't something I totally understood. So I had no idea ice climbing existed.
Well, the reason why I brought up Marquette is because that's where you went to college, and that's also the first time you went out ice climbing. It was in Marquette. Sounds like you had a pretty sandbagged first time out. So what happened?
If anybody sandbagged me, it was probably myself. I I realized ice climbing existed in the Upper Peninsula after I'd, yeah, spent some time at school, and I was 18 or maybe 19 and just, like, desperate to try ice climbing, and so I convinced some friends of mine to take me out climbing, but their plan was to climb on Grand Island just outside of Munising, and Grand Island is an island, and so to get to the ice climbing, it was it ended up being a round trip 10 to 12-mile ski, and not only had I never ice climbed before, I also had never put skis on ever, and so but I really wanted to try ice climbing, so I rented some cross country skis from our college and showed up. My friend showed me how to put the skis on in the parking lot, and we were out for from 8 AM to 8 PM. I fell desperately in love with both cross country skiing and with ice climbing. I could barely walk for 2 days afterwards, and I didn't care at all.
That's so wild. So you went ice climbing before rock climbing outside, right?
No, no, this was so Northern Michigan University has a climbing club, and I was, like, super fortunate to go to school somewhere where there was a climbing club because, again, I thought rock climbing was, like, indoor rock climbing. I didn't really have a sense of outdoor climbing, but my very first weekend that I was at college, they had, like, social climb and set up at one of the local crags, and so I actually got to go rock climbing my very first weekend of college and then wanted to
Ah,
try
okay.
the ice climb, and yeah. My friend borrowed boots for me that were 3 sizes too big, and, uh, yeah, that was my first time ice climbing.
What was it about ice climbing that kinda really called to you? And I guess just, like, how do you go from gym climbing to really wanting to ice climb? What was that progression like?
I've always been very outdoorsy. I was really into backpacking in high school, and so being outside was something that I've always appreciated and always wanted to do. I think that for me, I actually hated winter in high school, but was going to school in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and so then I, like, actively sought out ice climbing to try to change my mind about winter.
Did it work?
Oh, yeah, I cannot imagine life without winter now. I am instructing climbing here in Joshua Tree for 2 months this winter and said I can't possibly do more than that because I need to be somewhere where there's snow and ice.
In lower Michigan, are the winters, because I my impression of, like, the Upper Peninsula is it's like Antarctica in the winter, and it's, like, 8 months long kinda thing. Were the winters growing up in, I guess, sort of Southern Michigan, was it similar, or
Yeah, I grew up in West Michigan, and the winters, like, as a kid, I remember sledding a lot, but it's like winter comes and goes. It doesn't stay snowy like it does in the Upper Peninsula, and I increasingly more with climate change. But yeah, in high school, it was like snow meant I, like, couldn't drive, which is why, I didn't like it very much. I also didn't do outdoor like, I didn't know how to ski. I didn't grow up in a family that skied. I didn't have access to ice climbing. It just, like, felt like this thing that meant I couldn't that took away my freedom instead of giving me more.
I'm gonna, circle back to Marquette in college because you were super active. I came across this and I was chuckling. You were a triple major in environmental studies and sustainability and English writing and communication, and you actually won an award from your university. It basically was like you're the best student ever. It was kind of what the description for the award was. I'm wondering if that is is that like representative of how you like to approach life and activities, because tying in with kind of sandbagging yourself with a really big day out, first time ice climbing, and then also like taking on this big load with school. I'm just wondering if you sort of have this like take on the world mentality. I don't know if you want to put it that way, but
Yeah. No, I tend to be that way where it's like, if I'm gonna do something, I'm going to do it. And I'm somebody that has a lot of energy, and so I have the capacity to do a lot of things. And so, yeah, I don't usually tell people that I have a triple major just because I know it's a lot, but yeah, I not only did I triple major in college, I, like, was constantly involved in, like, every activity and club that you can imagine.
I actually first got connected to you sort of by proxy, and I don't know if that's really the way to say it, but I actually ended up writing an article about the Marquette climbing co-op, which I know you don't really want to talk about, so we can kind of gloss over this. But you helped change some housing zoning laws in the area, and you don't have to talk about that. But I guess I'm just wondering, like, were you doing a lot of just general organizing in college?
Yeah, and I mean, I am happy to talk your ear off about the co-op. I love the Marquette Climbers Co-op.
Please
I
do.
think that the I think the change that's happening there is the kinda change that we need. Yeah, the Marquette Climbers Co-op is a housing co-op in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan that was started by a handful of climbers that in 2012, which is when I arrived in Marquette, and so it existed when I got there, but it was still in its infancy. And when I lived in the co-op, we were really trying to figure out how to exist,
Mm,
and essentially the purpose of the co-op is to provide affordable housing and to try to live as sustainably as possible, kind of a hub for climbing in the Marquette area in particular, because there's a community bouldering cave and that used to be passed like from house to house to house, and it became a permanent location. I was really involved in the co-op and helping the co-op become a legitimate, like, recognized by the city cooperative, because there it didn't used to be possible to have legal housing cooperatives
mm.
in the city. And so super involved with that, but I was also involved in organizing a lot of events. Like, event planning is something community organization is really natural for me, and so I helped organize, like, climate, marches when I was in Marquette and all sorts of things.
Bringing that up as some foreshadowing. Well, about the rest of the episode. This will be my last question about college, and then we'll move on to the Adirondacks. I'm curious, what were you thinking you might do after graduating undergrad? Because you had these different majors, you were doing all this different organizing, and I actually read that you were thinking about doing a doctorate in English Lit, which didn't come to pass.
It still might, we'll see.
Ah, okay, nice.
I don't know my future. Yeah, I studied environmental communication, really, thinking that I would work for environmental nonprofits doing communications work, and I did. I got, what was my dream job right after college,
Oh,
working for
cool.
a small environmental organization doing communications work. I discovered that that means mostly sitting behind a computer screen,
Mhm,
and I quickly realized that I did not actually want to spend my working life behind a computer screen, and I really wanted to be working more with my hands or to be working more with people, and
mhm.
so I shifted away from nonprofit communications work into a farming and then eventually educating both in a classroom and outdoors now.
How did you end up in the Adirondacks?
Yeah, so after I graduated from school, I got that nonprofit job and realized sitting behind a computer isn't what I wanted to do, and I was actually working for an organization that focused on local food, and through that, started volunteering at a local farm, which turned into working for a local farm, and so I spent some time doing outdoor education, but really wanted to go back to farming, and the very first time I heard about the Adirondacks was actually on a climbing trip in the desert of Utah.
Oh, wow.
A friend of mine yeah, a friend of mine, climbing partner, grew up going to the Adirondacks and went to school in the Adirondacks and heard me talk about Michigan's Upper Peninsula and how much I loved the UP and recommended that the Adirondacks would be a place that I should go because of the similarities. So I actually went to the Adirondacks for the first time on a climbing trip about 9 months before I moved there. We were a climbing partner and I were on a trip to the Gunks, but I just really wanted to check out the Adirondacks and convinced him, and I saw that there was really good rock climbing and ice climbing, freshwater, and farms, and so I wanted to spend a summer farming in the Adirondacks, and so I emailed every single farm in the Adirondacks and
Mhm.
got a job and planned on staying in the Adirondacks for 1 farm season, but the community just felt so welcoming, and I really enjoyed being in the Adirondacks, and there was, yeah, that access to fresh water, there was farms, there was community, and so I ended up staying for 5 years. After farming, applied to a school and started teaching.
For folks that don't know, because even in I feel like even in the Northeast, a lot of people don't know about the Adirondacks. Could you just describe the park and what it's like? And you talked a little bit about the fresh water and things like that, but could you just provide some context for folks?
Yeah, the Adirondacks is a really big place. It's technically a state park that's bigger than maybe any of the national parks in the lower 48. You'll have to fact check me on that one.
I think it's bigger than Yellowstone for sure.
Yeah, the Adirondacks is a circular mountain range, and scattered throughout what is state land are all sorts of, like, different hamlets and villages and small towns, and so since it's such a large area, there's lots of lakes, very forested, snowy, icy in the winter. The rock is a northocite, which feels very, very similar to granite.
Well, I guess like what led to you from thinking you might stay for just a summer to 5 years?
Yeah, it was really the community. The rock climbing community immediately welcomed me. I felt like I was a local after having only lived there for a month or 2 months, and even as somebody who was at that time saying that I was transient and going to move to the next place at the end of the season, but people just treated me like I belonged there, and I also had friends that weren't climbers, being involved in the farming community, which felt pretty significant to me at the time because easy, I think, sometimes to make climbing friendships when you're, like, literally trusting your life
Mm.
with somebody, but to have friends in, like, the wider community felt really important to me. And then also talking to people about the winter. I had missed the previous winter because I was working environmental ed actually in Southern California. 3 different people told me I should work at the school that I ended up teaching at for more than 4 years because the school, North Country School, is really outdoor focused and also has very farm focused. Also, I had experience doing education, and so I applied to work at North Country School and got a job, and I taught middle school for, yeah, more than 4 years, and the community in the Adirondacks is unlike any community that I've been a part of.
Speaking of community, how did you end up meeting or connecting with Robbie Meekus and Noel Huther?
Robbie and I met at a trail building event the first summer that I lived in the Adirondacks. She'll if you hear the story of us meeting from her, it's pretty funny. I was living in my van at the time and rolled up, and she was like, "Who is this, like, professional climber in a van?" And and then and then she met me, like a farmer living, rock climbing, and yeah, she laughs that that's, like, the first impression she got, and now she knows me really well. But that's how we first met, and then she is and was my, like, the person I've ice climbed with in the
Mm.
Adirondacks the most, and so then, yeah, my first winter, she invited me out ice climbing quite a few times, which felt really special to be invited to ice climb with, like, such a strong woman
Mhm.
climber, and yeah, that first ice season, it just felt like I was in this community of, like, strong women ice climbers, which I hadn't been a part of before, so that felt really, really special. And then Noel had been involved in the Adirondack climbing scene for a long time. Noel went to school near the Adirondacks, and so I knew of Noel, like, like, a friend of a friend for a long time before I actually met Noel, but we bumped into each other at a crag, and then, I don't know, just kind of started climbing together and spent at least one season where Noel was my main climbing partner.
What is the queer community like in the Adirondacks?
I think that the queer community in the Adirondacks is, like, a dispersed community. I think
Mm.
that a lot of people would tell me that they longed for queer community, and my response to that was always, "It's not because we don't have queer people. There are queer people in the Adirondacks. It's just that the nature of the Adirondacks is that there's a lot of small towns, and so people, like, queer people in Saranac Lake might not know queer people in Keene Valley, for
Mm.
example. And so I would say, um, especially, like, a few years ago, people really didn't feel like there was queer community in the Adirondacks, and a few community builders like myself wanted to change because we said we can build the communities we wanna be a part of.
Could you talk to some of the affinity events that you organized?
Yeah, so I started planning affinity events again because
Mm.
I really truly believe that we can build the communities that we wanna be a part of, and funny enough, the first affinity event that I planned was actually a skateboarding event. Funny, like, I remember being 16 and being like, "I wanna get into rock climbing or skateboarding," and then, like, not getting into, I guess I pursued rock climbing once I got to college, but it was always like I always, like, thought skateboarding sounded cool, and then
It does.
in 2020, I taught 8th grade, and a few of my 8th graders were really into skateboarding, and so I said, like, "Help me pick out a board. Like, teach me to skateboard, I want to." And so as an adult, I started skateboarding, and, every time I went to one of the skate parks, I just, like, did not feel like I belonged at all. There was nobody that looked like me at all, and, like, I was
Mm.
a total beginner and just, like, really didn't feel like I belonged and just wanted to cry even though I really liked skateboarding.
Mm.
And I said, I know that there's other, like, femme and queer skateboarders in the Adirondacks. Like, let's just like all get together and let's skateboard. And honestly, like I wasn't sure who would show up. I, like, knew my best friend who got into skateboarding at the same time as me and another one of our colleagues at the North Country School, Jess Jeffrey, we would, like, show up to this skateboarding event, but then I was like, "Great, if it's the 3 of us, we'll have a great time. That'll be that." But, like, much to my surprise, we filled the entire Wilmington skate park, and I saw, like, all sorts of connections be made, like, people met each other and then started skating with each other, and it just, like, felt just, like, seeing that I could plan this event for skateboarding, something that I had started doing 6 months earlier, and have
Mm,
this impact on the community, I thought, "If I can do this with skateboarding, then I can do this with something that I've been doing for much longer, which is climbing." And
mm,
so, it was after the skate event that I said, "You know what? People so often say they wished that there was queer community in the Adirondacks, and they wish that there was more diversity in climbing. We can make that happen." And so I approached Robbi and asked her if she would be willing to help me plan some queer rock climbing events, and she agreed. And similar to the skate event, like, we didn't know who would show up. It was like, maybe this will just be Robbi and I climbing together, and if that's the case, great. Robbi and I will have a great time climbing together. But it actually ended up being a really successful event. We had a number of climbers that a lot of people who had tried climbing before but just didn't have the skills on their own or didn't have, like, the partners ended up coming to the rock climbing event, so we immediately said, "Hey, let's do another one." So we planned the 2 rock climbing affinity events, and we purposefully kept them, like, as a pretty Adirondack local, doing them on Thursday evening. But then the following winter, Robbie approached Noel and I and said, "Hey, could we do the same thing for ice climbing?" And I literally laughed. I said, "Robbie, like, queer ice climbers, like, you're looking at them. It's the 3 of us. We are the queer ice climbers in the Adirondacks." Like, and we were planning on climbing, like, 2 days after that, so I said, like, "How about this weekend if we're gonna do a queer ice climbing event? Like, we are the queer Adirondack ice climbers. We're doing the event this weekend." And Robbie was like, "No, no, no, like, I'm serious, I want it to be a thing." And I was like, "Okay, like, let's try." Again, maybe it's just Robbie, Noel, and I, but we ended up setting a date for a few months later for a weekend and making just like a pretty simple poster and putting the word out there. And then the response we got was unbelievable. We
mm,
First off, the Crux, which is a nonprofit based in New York City, offered to pay for everybody's gear rentals, and then we set up ropes and got a few other climbers to help us with that, and yeah, next thing we knew, we had 40 people registered to come all over the Northeast, and almost every single one of those people ended up coming, even though it was an absolute blizzard outside. That just showed the need for an event like this.
What was it like at the event, and what were you seeing from the attendees?
Yeah, the first year, I remember I was belaying somebody similarly who had never ice climbed before, and she was halfway up the wall, and she yelled down, "I feel so strong. I feel so powerful. I feel so safe," which just gave me chills because coming from somebody who is queer, and there's so many challenges being a queer person, to hear somebody, like, yell down halfway up an ice pitch that they felt so safe
Mm.
and they felt so powerful and felt so strong just showed me also why we need events like this. Seeing the relationships that were being formed at the
Mm.
festival, it was a combination of people who had ice climbed before and were coming with ice climbing experience, who just maybe didn't have the connections to other queer ice climbers, and a combination of people who had never ice climbed before that were trying it for the first time. And you could see people introducing themselves, like realizing they both lived in Vermont and could climb together, or they both like came to the Adirondacks regularly, and just like the partnerships and community that was built. And so we knew immediately, like at the first festival, we're like, this needs to not be a one-time event. Like we are definitely going to host. This is going to become an annual thing. We'll do it every year, and we have.
Nice. That's awesome. It sounds like a lot of really meaningful relationships and experiences took place at the first two. When you were organizing some of the queer rock climbing events, you received some pushback. More or less, you said people didn't understand the value of an affinity space and thought you were being exclusionary. And what do you say to that? I guess, what do you say to why affinity spaces are so important?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, maybe every affinity climbing space that I've ever been a part of has been pushed against for one reason or another. And also, I am the person and the climber I am today because of affinity spaces. Um, and I understand the perspective people have where they're saying, like, hey, if you're creating an affinity space, you're creating this space that is only for certain people, like people who share an identity that is like, and people say, that's creating a divide in the community. And I understand, like, yes, by definition, having affinity space like means it's a space that is not for everybody. But ultimately, it does create a much more inclusive culture and community because we only feel safe enough to try new things and to be a beginner and make mistakes and learn if we're in an environment where we feel safe. If people don't know that they're going to be respected if they belong, they might not feel that trying something that also is outside of their comfort zone is for them. And so affinity spaces create a place where people are therefore feel safe enough to be vulnerable and to try something that otherwise might not be something that would feel safe to try. When somebody finds ice climbing or a different activity through an affinity space and gets comfortable in that affinity space, they then can join the wider community and then make the wider community a much more diverse place. And so ultimately, affinity spaces like provide this place where people will feel safe, learn the skills that they need to then take into the larger community.
At a fundamental level, helping people know from the get-go that they're going to be welcome and feel comfortable in a new space is a significant barrier to break down, especially for a sport like ice climbing. In the context of the Ice Fest, are there more barriers that you're trying to reduce or break down?
Yeah, it's been really important to Robbi and I, and we have many co-organizers now, to provide a free climbing festival. Ice climbing, the gear for it is really expensive, and so it's been really important to us to figure out a way that we can reduce those financial barriers. We all are volunteering our time to organize the festival. That means that there's no registration cost or anything there. We've also like the libraries donated their space for us to be able to host our evening gatherings, and then this year something we really wanted to focus on was, okay, the festival itself is free, but if you're not local to the Adirondacks and if you don't have a place to stay or if you have to travel there, that still can be really a cost barrier that will prevent you from being able to try ice climbing. And so for the first year this year, we've worked really hard to create a scholarship fund. And so we have different organizations that have graciously, and individuals, we started a GoFundMe that have donated to this scholarship fund. And so that feels really important to us to reduce that barrier there. We're also really interested in how we can continue to make this festival more intersectional. We've reached out to some BIPOC groups to see how we can work with them, to see if we can reduce any barriers there as well. And yeah, so I guess those are kind of the barriers we've been focusing on as organizers so far.
How much are you looking to fundraise for these scholarships, and how much would that goal support? Like, how many people would that support?
Our goal right now is to raise for this year $3,500, and we're hoping to fund at least 6 scholarships. The way that our scholarship is running is like people requesting scholarships as they need it. And so this is the very first year we're kind of like still figuring out like what the scholarship need really is, and also like how much we can raise to offer people. And so that's kind of where we're at.
I've heard it a few times actually from guests on this podcast where, it's easy to get support when you're a beginner, but as they advance in their own climbing, as a person of color or a woman in specific examples, it can, there's much less climbers of those identities that are just at higher climbing levels. And so it speaks to difficulty of finding like climbing partners and also mentors. And I guess, have you experienced that yourself as you've advanced in your climbing?
I feel like I've experienced that since the beginning,
Mm.
honestly, as an ice climber. I think I've been ice climbing for a decade now, and I think my ice climbing journey when I describe it to people is anything but smooth,
Mm.
wanted to get into ice climbing, found somebody, taught me, got into it. It was not that way at all whatsoever for me. I think, yeah, when I first started ice climbing, my very first time out, like graciously had my friends Neil, Luke, and Laura that took me out, but then they all graduated. And after that, I didn't have any ice climbing mentors at all whatsoever, but I did have this pair of boots that was 3 sizes too big that had been lent to me, and a pair of crampons, and I really, really wanted to ice climb. I knew how to set up top ropes and didn't have anybody that was inviting me to ice climb with them. And so my solution was to invite other people to ice climb with me. And I would convince anybody that could fit into the pair of boots that I had to come out with me, and I would set up top ropes, and we would trade boots at the bottom of the climb. And I, with almost no ice climbing experience myself, would be the experienced person because I didn't have anybody else to teach me. And so I taught myself. And although I've been ice climbing for a long time, I think it wasn't really till I got to the Adirondacks and met Robbi where I had anybody that had more experience than me teaching me anything about ice climbing. And so I think, like, yeah, your question about there being mentors, I think, like, from the very beginning for me was something that I was really lacking. And then I think, like, also, yeah, I, like, joke, like, I was in college and didn't have, like, the funds, to buy ice climbing gear myself. But not only that, like, the ice climbing gear doesn't exist anyway. I've, like I said, been ice climbing for 10 years and have never in my life put a pair of ice climbing boots on that fit because they don't exist in my size, or at least, and I've spent extensive time searching, but I wear a 35 and a half, and single boots end at 36 and double boots end at 37. And so, um, yeah, that's another barrier that I personally have had for ice climbing.
What's the best solution you found so far for double boots and boots in general?
Yeah, I emailed Intuition Liners and they suggested actually it's a water ski liner that's made with the same materials as the mountaineering boots, but it's extra thick. And so the solution is a pair of boots that is a size and a half too big with a thicker liner.
Oh well, this is going to show my ignorance. But do they make ski boots or like AT boots that are warm enough but small enough?
I literally just rolled my eyes because it is such a similar experience. Yeah, so 22.5 is the size ski boot, and it is possible, but nearly impossible to find AT boots in that size. I went from, like, shop to shop to shop, and everybody just 2 years ago, and everybody kept telling me they didn't exist. And then finally, I went to, like, a very specific, uh, place in Park City, and they did hook me up with a pair of 22.5s, and actually more have been made in the last 2 years, more brands are making them. But the problem is most, maybe every 22.5 is actually the size up with, again, just a thicker liner, and so
Yeah.
it's almost so then they pack out really quickly, so it's like it's, a little bit easier to find the size in AT boots than mountaineering boots because they actually exist, but it's still an very challenging. And I'm not the only one, both for mountaineering and for ice climbing, like, I keep on running into people that are like, "Yes, this is a problem, I have this problem."
If you were the enterprising type, this sounds like a business opportunity.
Maybe.
Sorry, I don't now I'm just curious. Is it a similar challenge with, gloves as well then?
Yeah, it's so most outdoor things I can just size down to children's, but gloves, unfortunately, the way children's gloves are made, the palms are a lot smaller,
Yeah.
and so you can't just, like, bump down to and also, like, technical gear, I don't know. Yeah, so no, gloves are really a challenge too, and also, yeah, if anyone listening has suggestions for small gloves, I'm taking them. I'm still looking for a pair that I'm super happy with.
So it's one thing to have this winter gear for sort of like the continental states, but, you're kinda thinking bigger for your own ice climbing, right?
Yeah, yeah, Robbie and I planned a trip to Alaska. We're heading to the Ruth Gorge this April.
Nice. So, did you end up finding double boots that would work for you or
It's the solution is the extra thick liner, and that's really was the impetus for me finding that solution. I have been ice climbing in boots that are just too big that I can lift my heels up in for years, and that's actually another reason why my ice climbing journey has been a slow, gradual build over the last 10 years is because for a lot of years, I just didn't feel secure enough in boots that were too big to want to try to lead until I finally was like, "You know what? I feel good enough. I'm just gonna start doing it anyway in boots that are too big," and that's just what I've done. I've just climbed in boots that are too big, but when Robbie and I planned we're in the talks about this trip to Alaska, Robbie's like she said to me, she's like, "You have the skills, you have the fitness, the thing that you need is the gear. Like, you cannot go to Alaska if you don't have a pair of double boots that will work." And so that was my mission this fall was I was like, "It can't be that I can't go to Alaska because I don't have the gear." Like, that is not an acceptable thing for me to not be able to go on this Alaska expedition, which I've dreamt of for so long because the gear doesn't exist. Like, this can't be possible. And I actually had the fortune to take my rock guide course this fall, and I was asking my instructors what advice they had for me, and they reached out to their networks on my behalf, and, these are IMFGA guides, and
Mm.
so well connected, and tried to find the solution, and they couldn't find anybody that knew of anything smaller, and I emailed every single company, like, even really obscure ones, to ask if they could custom make them because I was just, like, not gonna accept that the answer was that I couldn't go to Alaska because I didn't have the boots. I even had a friend who speaks Japanese, like, translate a Japanese multiple websites for me, and this everybody just kept on telling me that they didn't exist, and so the solution I'm going with is just, like, really thick liners because I I've not found anybody that makes smaller than 37 double boots.
So if anyone listening knows of brands or has sizes that are smaller, definitely get in touch.
Please.
Please. For those For those who want to attend, how can they find more information and then register for the event? And for those who are interested in the scholarship, where can they find more info?
So we have an email address that you can reach out to if you have any questions about the festival at all. And that is queericeadk@gmail.com. We have a lot of information on our Instagram page, and that's Adirondack_queer_ice_fest. And so that's where we've been posting like all of our announcements. Through that, there's a link to the scholarship fund. And you can either, there's a GoFundMe, or if you want a tax deductible donation, there's a link there for our fiscal sponsor directly. And yeah, that scholarship money is going directly to increasing accessibility to ice climbing for underrepresented climbers. And also, if you're interested in attending the festival is February 23rd through 25th. And to be honest, the registration fills really fast. And so my recommendation would be not to procrastinate. This is what happens every year. It's like clearly there is such a demand for events like this. The first year, like I said, we had no idea if anyone would come, and we had 40 people come. And then last year, a similar thing happened where we actually filled all of our registration spots in 9 days, and we did almost no advertising for it. And so I talked Robbi into opening up some more registration spots. We got some more volunteers to open up some more spots. And so, yeah, you can find that registration link from the link on our Instagram is the best way to go about it. But don't procrastinate. Sign up right away.
When are you going to get a website?
That's a good question. This festival is so grassroots.
Yeah.
Like the fact that we are where we are right now is unbelievable. And I like have the poster for this year's festival pulled up right now, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, wow, we look so professional. And it's yeah, like I'm like laughing about it because it's like literally it was Robbi, Noel, and I, like, and last year was Robbi and I. Robbi's a full-time forest ranger. I, until this year, was a full-time middle school teacher, and both of us were just, like, volunteering in our free time to put together this event, and there's nobody that's being paid for this, like, it's all volunteer time. And so, yeah, the first 2 years, it was, like, us kind of just, like, scrambling to put something together, like, very, very organic, like, not a lot of, like, professional support or none, like. And then after Saturday night's event last year, a handful of people who'd come both the first and second year said like, "Hey, we really wanna support this event. How can we help you organize it?" And Robbi and I were like, "Oh my gosh, this is the most incredible thing to have more support." And so this year we have, I think, 7 or 8 of us that are
Oh,
helping,
well.
and we've like yeah, and we've actually been like meeting regularly, since August to plan it. And so this year, Joe, who's a graphic designer, do our poster, and it's like so beautiful. And so all of these things, it's like, yeah, a website would be great, but again, like we're all volunteers that are doing this, like when can we schedule a meeting? Oh, wait, somebody's on a climbing trip or, whatever. Like, I am now working as an outdoor educator and guide. And so I'm out of self service more than I'm in it. And so, yeah, maybe we'll have a website next year. Who knows? But like for now, it's like the fact that everything is coming together in the way that it is this year is just like I am like this literally started in my kitchen because me and a friend were like we should have a queer ice climbing festival. And then yeah, I think I saw like you repost it, and like other people that I've had no connection with are like sharing this event, and I'm like I like can't believe that something that started just because Robbi and I were like we should do this, like let's get some friends together and go ice climbing, has turned into this event that I have people here where I'm working in California that, like, want to travel to this
Oh,
event, which
wow.
again just shows me, and my response to that is we should just have more of these. We should
Mm.
just plan one here on the West Coast. Like, clearly there's this demand for this event, like, it doesn't need to be just in the Adirondacks. Let's do more of these. And we can make it happen. If Robbie and I could make this happen, we can make this happen.
I love how grassroots it is. So you talked about Alaska, but what's next for you in other areas?
So I decided last year to transition from being a middle school teacher in the classroom to teaching outside full time. And so I spent the summer and right now instructing for Outward Bound California. The North Face paid for me to do my rock guide, my AMGA rock
Oh,
guide.
nice.
So I'm apprentice rock guide now. And so I'm spending this winter after Joshua Tree really pursuing a lot more avalanche education. I'm taking my Pro 1 and Rec 2, hoping to become an avalanche instructor in the future. And then going to Alaska with Robbi, and I'm applying currently for guiding alpine guiding jobs. And so what's next for me, I'm really dreaming of continuing to hold affinity spaces. I'm really dreaming of, like, creating a guiding career where I can invite others into the mountaineering community, whether that be ski touring, ice climbing, rock climbing, alpine climbing. And so I'm focusing on building my technical skills so that I can continue to pursue guiding and hopefully use that to make our community a more robust and diverse community.
If you were to give your younger self one piece of beta, could be for climbing, could be for life, could be for skateboarding, what would that be?
This, like, really came to mind working for Outward Bound California this summer. I was living really close to Yosemite, and I think that I had always been like, "Oh my god, I have to be, like, a really strong climber before I go to Yosemite for the first time," and, like, that is not the case. I would have had such a heyday going there, as, like, a 5'8", 5'6" trad leader, and I think could have grown a lot more if I'd been there sooner. And I think, like, it's a similar thing, like, as I've gotten closer and closer into mountaineering, where it's like I didn't know anybody really and was waiting for somebody to come along. And in some ways, like, yeah, Robbie and I, like, now planning this expedition to Alaska, but I think my avalanche education really showed me that I can learn things on my own and practice things. I think that I wish I'd realized that a little bit earlier, that, like, I can practice, like, yes, you're right, like, some technical skills, like, you need to be with somebody, like, physically teaching you, but also, like, I learn really well from books, and so, like, taking a book and, like, learning is something I can,
Mm.
like, practice systems on my own.
Well, thank you very much, Melissa. I'm excited for your third iteration this February.
Yeah, me too.
While registration is full, you can support the festival by donating on GoFundMe at gofundme.com/f/Adirondack queer ice fest scholarships. And if you'd like to follow along with this year's events and stay up to date for future happenings, their Instagram is at Adirondack _queer ice fest. You can find all the links in the show notes. Lastly, if you've been enjoying the podcast, consider leaving us a review on Spotify or Apple, as it helps let others know, yeah, this is the good stuff.